Good afternoon, guys. Today we are going to be having a discussion of 24th February second shift chemistry paper. Now, a quick disclaimer before we start off. The questions which we have over here are purely reproduced from the student's memory. So there will be a few errors over here, some options will be missing, etc. Obviously, wherever there is an error which I can understand and which I feel is going to be correctable, I will talk about what is going to be the situation. Now, before we start off with the question paper over here, one quick point as well. 24th morning shift question paper mainly ended up having very easy physical chemistry questions, and organic and inorganic were a little bit more twisted and tricky. This particular question paper here is something which is going to be having organic and inorganic being a little bit more easier and more or less purely from NCERT, with physical chemistry questions being more calculation oriented. So in this particular question paper here, the real deciding factor is going to mainly be whether the student has picked the correct physical chemistry questions to attend over here. If the student has wasted a lot of time, solving a physical chemistry question which could have been avoided, definitely they would have benefited. If they had avoided that question, definitely they would have benefited. But if they have spent a lot of time solving, definitely they would have lost out a bit of time which they could have used for the maths and physics papers and the rest of the chemistry paper as well. Anyway, let's start off with the chemistry paper discussion now. So this is basically the 24th February second shift paper. Let's start off. Okay, so compare the rate of aromatic nucleophilic substitution reaction for the following compounds. Now they are giving you 4 compounds here. This is a straightforward named reaction which is going to be SNAR in this particular case here, ipso substitution. So when you're going to be having ipso substitution in this particular case here, over here, what is going to be happening in this particular case is very straightforward. Whenever you're going to be having the chlorine undergoing substitution here, if you're going to be having other supporting minus R groups, this is a powerful minus R minus I group. Both of these are going to be powerful minus R minus I groups. All 3 of these are going to be powerful minus R minus I groups. What will these minus R minus I groups do effectively? They will end up dumping a delta plus on this particular carbon. Thereby, they will end up making the attack of the nucleophile happen more easily. At the same time, let me take one example and explain here. When you are having the nucleophilic substitution happening, what will be happening is like this. Let's say there's a chlorine here, let's take the nitro here. So the nitro is like this. When a nucleophile attacks in this location here, what is going to be happening is the nucleophile generally is going to be a strong base in this particular case as well. The nucleophile will do electromeric effect, this bond will shift over here. When it is shifting over here, we'll be getting a carbanion like this. Now this carbanion which is formed over here can show resonance with the N double bond O in this case. Thereby the idea or the principle in this case is this. When you have powerful electron withdrawing groups which are specifically minus R groups over here, what happens is they will help in stabilizing the carbanion formed during the reaction in this case, because of which the reaction will be happening faster. So in this case, this particular compound number 4 has got 3 minus R groups which are going to be supporting and stabilizing the carbanion, making this particular fellow the most stable in this case. Similarly, obviously, if it is more stable carbanion, it will also be the faster one which is going to be reacting. Next thing over here is this particular compound number 3 is going to be having 2 nitro groups, making it the next fastest. Compound number 2 is going to be the next. Compound 1 is going to be the slowest, because compound 1 is going to be having no supporting groups available over here. So you're going to be having answer as 4 greater than 3 greater than 2 greater than 1 in this particular case here. So answer for this question is option 4. This is question number 1. Of course, just to make it clear, this is based on a standard named reaction. All right, you don't need too much over here in terms of concept understanding. You need to understand how this reaction works in general. Let's get to the next one. This next question is a question from polymers. All right, so BuNaS is going to be, of course, a type of rubber here. So it's going to be styrene butadiene rubber. So styrene butadiene rubber, now we're going to be having 1,3-butadiene is going to be one of the monomers over here. The other monomer is going to be styrene. What is styrene? Styrene is going to be this guy. You're having a benzene ring and you're going to be having a C double bond C. So these are my two monomers which are going to be used for the formation of BUNA-S. The BUNA basically talks about butadiene in this particular case here, 1,3-butadiene. The S indicates the styrene in this particular case here. So of course the answer is styrene. This is a very easy giveaway question. I'm hoping that every student who has attempted this paper has taken advantage of this question. It's a very straightforward question. Let's get to the next one. Of course, this is available in your NCERT polymers chapter. Third one, which of the following set of the reagents is used to convert nitrobenzene to 1,3-dibromobenzene? So we want to convert nitrobenzene into 1,3-dibromobenzene. Now, in this particular case here, obviously, as you can see, we don't have all the options available. We only have the correct option available. We don't have all the options available. So let's talk about what's happening in this correct option directly here. Let me explain what's the point over here as to why we are doing it in this fashion. So in the first step here, what you want to do over here is we want 1,3 substitution here, correct? Now, NO2 can be converted into a bromine very easily via converting it to aniline and then diazotizing it. But aniline is going to be something which is ortho-para-directing, while I want the bromine to be on 1,3 location in the meta location. So we need to first do bromination at a meta location. Nitro happens to be a very convenient meta directing group, so we can directly use this guy. So I'll be doing direct bromination here, wherein the product obtained here will be this. Meta bromo substituent is what we'll be getting. Once I got the meta here, now the job is very simple. We just need to convert the nitro into a bromine. How do I convert the nitro to a bromine? We will first convert it to an NH2. How do I convert it to NH2? I'll be performing reduction with tin and HCl. Instead of tin and HCl, we can also use iron and HCl. That will also do the job. Next, once you're converted to NH2 over here, now we need to diazotize it. Now, what is this diazotization over here? We'll be using NaNO2 and HCl. Of course, what condition will I have over here? I'll have ice cold conditions, basically 0 to 5 degrees Celsius. Next step, I'll have to convert this guy into a bromine over here. This is going to be done via Sand-Meyer's reaction, CuBr and HBr. You can also do it directly by using copper and HBr as well. That will also do the job directly. So this is going to be your procedure. This is going to be your steps for the conversion in this case. It's a fairly straightforward, easy question. Of course, it does involve quite a few named reactions, but it only involves standard named reactions. For instance, it involves EAS here, reduction, diazotization, conversion, and Sand-Meyer reaction, of course. So it involves 3 named reactions in the process here. This is again a question which you can solve cleanly if you are properly thorough with all named reactions. Let's get to the next one. The reagent used to convert the following is. This is a good question. Now, luckily though, the options given are much easier to understand and eliminate of. In this particular case here, we need to convert the C double bond O into a CH2. Okay, I need to convert the C double bond O into a CH2. I can do either Wolff-Kishner or Clemmensen. There is one issue though. Clemmensen's will not do the job properly over here. Why will Clemmensen's reduction not work properly here? Mainly because there are double bonds present. And you want the double bonds to remain intact. When you want the double bonds to remain intact, the basic idea here is you should be having the double bond not reacting with the medium. If I'm using acidic medium, the double bond will react with my acidic medium. That is going to spoil the double bond over here. So I cannot do Clemmensen's reduction. Luckily, that controversy was never here. They have given you easy options here. Red phosphorus and chlorine will do halogenation. So it is not going to be useful anyway. I need to convert double bond O to CH2. So I can eliminate this straight away. Next, NaBH4 and nickel hydrogen. Nickel hydrogen, you guys know already, is going to be used in reducing C double bond C. My C double bond C is intact in the product over here, which means I should make sure that the C double bond C is not going to be destroyed in the reaction. That means I cannot use nickel hydrogen. NaBH4 is used in converting the aldehyde or ketone into an alcohol, not into an alkane. So this is also wrong. So by a very simple process of elimination, we could get the answer as this guy. Let me explain what is going to be happening here. What is the actual reaction here? This is actually Wolff-Kishner reduction. So let me quickly show you how it works. When you're going to be having RC double bond OH, in the first step, we'll be reacting it with hydrazine. Hydrazine is going to be N2H4. In the second step, I will simply be dumping basic medium. In this case, the C2H5O minus Na plus is basically your basic medium, nothing else. So your OH minus here, instead of OH minus, we are going to be having any other basic medium can also do the job. In this particular case here, the C2H5O minus Na plus is going to be replacing the OH minus and is going to behave as your basic medium in this reaction. So this is going to be having answer as option number 1, which is a form of Wolff-Kishner reduction. Let's get to the next one. Okay, question number 5. Of course, this question, they have basically combined both biomolecules and chemistry in everyday life in this particular topic over here. So this one question combines both in this case. Now let's talk about each of these here. Valium. Valium is an over-the-counter painkiller which is available in the United States. It is not particularly sold in India over here because it is quite dangerous in terms of the fact that it is an addictive substance. Let's talk about where Valium is used in India here. India, it is used mainly as a tranquilizer. It is also going to be something which has some painkiller properties. Painkiller na analgesic also it can be considered. So Valium has got both analgesic and tranquilizer properties. Mainly though, it is going to be having tranquilizer properties. When will Valium be prescribed for a patient? If a patient is very depressed and they are not able to sleep properly, generally Valium will be given to make the patient have a good night's sleep. It helps the patient sleep basically. That's basically the idea behind Valium. Let's get to morphine. Morphine is a proper painkiller. Alright, it is a high density, very powerful painkiller. It is generally given for terminal cancer patients. Cancer patients and patients who are having serious pain like hip replacement surgeries or arthritis in very advanced condition. Those kind of patients generally end up being prescribed morphine. Morphine, of course, is also a highly addictive drug. Alright, so morphine is going to be something which is a proper painkiller. So it goes with analgesic. Analgesic na painkiller. So you're going to be having analgesic is going to be a painkiller in this case. Next, norethindrone. Norethindrone is going to be another form of progesterone. Progesterone is one of the hormones which is going to be responsible for pregnancy in the woman's body. So when you're talking about the human body here, norethindrone is going to be something which is used by women for as an anti-fertility drug. Anti-fertility drug in the sense, if they do not want to get pregnant, they can take this particular drug. It is going to be something which is also referred to as a morning after pill in some countries. So this is going to be an anti-fertility drug over here. This is going to come under the category of S. Vitamin B12. Now, first 3 options were all going to be from Chemistry in Everyday Life chapter from NCERT textbook. All 3 of these options are available in that chapter and all their uses are clearly mentioned. Now, vitamin B12 on the other hand is going to be from Biomolecules chapter in NCERT. It is available in a big tabular column in Biomolecules chapter under vitamins. Now, when you're talking about this vitamin B12, you're going to be having the deficiency disease it causes. So the deficiency disease this guy is going to be causing is going to be your pernicious anemia in this particular case here. What does pernicious anemia mean? Pernicious anemia, it basically means that the blood is not going to be having enough hemoglobin content. Basically, if there is not enough hemoglobin content, the blood cannot absorb enough oxygen. Basically, the person who is suffering from this disease will feel a shortness of breath very regularly. Why? Because you're going to be having not enough hemoglobin, the blood is not able to absorb enough oxygen from the lungs, which makes them basically go out of breath very, 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 very quickly. So this is going to be something which is going to be the deficiency disease caused by vitamin B12. If vitamin B12 is not available in sufficient quantity, that person will suffer from pernicious anemia. Let's get to the next one. Just to be clear, this information is also given in your NCERT textbook, Biomolecules, tabular column, under vitamins. Next, BOD is the parameter that can be helpful for the survival of aquatic life. This is correct. BOD is basically going to be biochemical oxygen demand. It is available in NCERT 11th standard textbook, environmental chemistry chapter. Let's get to the next point. Optimum value of BOD is 6.5. This is unfortunately wrong. When you're looking at BOD value, the lower the BOD value. So if I'm having cleaner water, that will have lower BOD. Higher BOD na, it is going to be more impure water. Generally, when you're looking at clean water, it is going to be something which is going to be considered as having a BOD of less than 5. Okay, if the BOD value is going to be less than 5, that is going to be considered as clean water generally. So in this particular case here, optimum value of BOD na, it is expected to be 5 or lower than 5. 6.5 unfortunately is wrong over here. So statement 1 is true, statement 2 is false, is correct. Answer is option 1 in this question. This data is available in environmental chemistry chapter in class 11 NCERT textbook. Let's get to the next. Okay, how many of the following amines can be prepared by Gabriel Thalamide synthesis? This looks like a numerical based question. It's an easy numerical based question from organic chemistry. Definitely one of the easier numericals which you definitely should be choosing to attempt. As I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion itself, in this particular question paper, the physical chemistry questions are lengthy in terms of calculations. See, the advantage which you have in this particular round and in the coming 3 rounds of JEE mains are basically going to be the fact that out of the 10 numerical questions, you need to only choose 5. Which means if you are going to be smart enough, you can effectively avoid the lengthy calculation based questions. Or if you do not know the organic chemistry part properly, then you can sit and do the lengthy calculation and at least get the answer properly. Either way, a smart student who has learned the full syllabus properly should definitely get this question done, because this will save them a lot of time from spending it on some lengthy calculation based question in physical chemistry later. Let's come to this question. So, how many of the following amines can be prepared by Gabriel Thalamide synthesis? Gabriel Thalamide synthesis is going to be something which is meant for preparation of aliphatic primary amines. So, aliphatic primary amines are going to be prepared by Gabriel Thalamide synthesis. In this particular case, this is an aliphatic primary amine, aliphatic primary amine, aliphatic primary amine. Now, why am I calling the first one as an aliphatic primary amine? Because the amino group is attached to a normal carbon. It is not an aromatic carbon here. Whereas this is going to be coming under the category of an aromatic amine. Now, why is it that only aliphatic primary amines can be prepared using this Gabriel Thalamide synthesis? Mainly because in Gabriel Thalamide synthesis, the mechanism followed is going to be an SN2-mech at the last step. So when you're considering Gabriel Thalamide synthesis, let me quickly give you an example here. We will be using thalamide. So when I'm talking about thalamide anion is going to be this guy, nitrogen with a negative charge. How do I get this? I take thalamide and then basically end up adding NaOH. When I add NaOH, the acidic hydrogen or nitrogen will get out. This N- is going to be stabilized by resonance. Because it's stabilized by resonance, the N- is stable. This N-, I'm going to be reacting it with an Rx. When I react it with an Rx over here, the N- will come and perform an SN2 attack over here and thereby kick out the halogen in the process over here. So when it kicks out the halogen, we'll be getting the product obtained as something like this. Now, in the next step here, we'll perform hydrolysis and we'll end up getting RNH2 as the product. This is basically your Gabriel Thalamide synthesis. This step is an SN2 step. SN2 step now, I need to have this R group has to be 0 degree or 1 degree aliphatic for good yield. If it is going to be secondary or tertiary, I'll be getting poor yield. Tertiary will not do the job at all. At the same time, it also cannot be aromatic in this case. So tertiary and aromatic are not allowed. Tertiary, aromatic, vinyl are not allowed in this case. So these three will not work over here. These are not allowed for this over here. 0 degree and 1 degree will give me very good yield over here if it is aliphatic. But if it's going to be tertiary location or aromatic or vinyl, the reaction will not happen properly in this case. So in this case here, I will not have second one working. So answer for this question has to be 3. Let's get to the next one. Again, this is a standard named reaction which is going to be involved in preparation of amines. Question number 8. Which of the following compounds cannot be prepared by the reaction of alkyne with HgSO4 and dilute sulfuric acid? Let's talk about each of these here. Let's take this guy. If I take this with Hg2 plus and H2SO4, my product formed in this case will be this guy. This fellow will then tautomerize to give me this aldehyde, which is certainly going to be possible. This second compound is a problem though. Why is that going to be a problem in this particular case? They are asking cannot be prepared. This can be prepared. So first option is definitely not the correct answer. Let's get to the second one here. So which cannot be prepared is asked here. So you need to pay attention to the question as well. They are asking cannot. Let's go with the second guy. If I'm taking this fellow here, if I do the same reaction, what will be happening is I will be having Markov-Nikov addition happening. So I'll get a double bond here and an OH over here, which will then tautomerize to give me a ketone in the process. I do not get this aldehyde over here. That means this cannot be obtained. Answer has to be second option. Let's get to the remaining two anyway and confirm. Third one, what is my alkyne which is going to be required over here? If I start off with say this alkyne, or if I start off with this alkyne, both of them on the same reaction will give me this product over here. Because Markov-Nikov addition wise, I'll be having attack happening over here, I'll get an enol here, or I'll get an enol over here. Both will give me answer as third option here. And the fourth one similarly is going to be just as straightforward and easy. Fourth ke liye, what will be my starting over there? My starting will be this way. I'll be having this fellow as my starting. In this case, same reaction, HgSO4, H2SO4 will give me the product as that, which will be obtained after tautomerism. So this is going to be your answer for 8th question, second option. The other two guys are definitely going to be capable of getting prepared, which means that is not our answer here. They are asking which cannot be prepared. Answer has to be option number 2. Let's get to the next one. Again, this is a named reaction from class 11 NCERT hydrocarbons chapter. Next one. Diazonium salt of which of the following will give colored dye on reaction with beta naphthalene sodium hydroxide. So this is basically going to be your dye test. In the dye test, I need to get a diazonium salt. They have clearly told us diazonium salt is needed. Diazonium salt na, what is required over there first of all? I need a primary amine. Diazonium salt ke liye, I need an aromatic primary amine. If I have an aromatic primary amine reacting with say NaNO2 plus HCl, 0 degrees to 5 degrees Celsius, we'll end up having aromatic diazonium salt obtained over here. This is my aromatic diazonium system. This aromatic diazonium system ke liye, I require an aromatic primary amine over here. So if I need an aromatic primary amine in this case here, first one, this is secondary, so wrong. Second one, this is going to be a tertiary amine, wrong. This is going to be an aliphatic amine. This is not aromatic. Okay, so this guy is going to be an aliphatic amine, wrong. Last one fits the bill perfectly. This is going to be an aromatic primary amine. Perfectly correct. So answer is going to be your fourth option in this particular case here. This is basically your reaction in this case. All you need to understand here is how to prepare diazonium salt and when will the diazonium salt be stable. The diazonium salt is going to be stable only if it is an aromatic primary amine. Let's get to the next one. The correct bond angle and shape of I3 minus 1 is going to be. I3 minus 1 is going to be something where how to proceed for these kind of questions over here. It's not that particularly complicated. There are formula methods. I prefer to want to say just directly explain. So let me just directly explain. There has to be one iodine as a central atom in this case. So if I'm going to be considering one iodine as a central atom, take the negative charge on the central system. So normally iodine is going to be having 7 valence electrons. Now I have one extra electron. So right now I minus is going to be having 8 valence electrons. Okay, there are 3 iodines totally. The central iodine is going to be I minus now. I need to have 2 more iodines bonded to this guy. So 2 more iodines bonded now. Out of these 8 valence electrons, there are 2 bond pairs. Each bond pair will require one electron because it's forming a bond over here. So out of the 8 valence electrons, 2 electrons are used up. How many are left over in this case? There are 6 valence electrons left over. Those 6 electrons left over will basically end up becoming 3 lone pairs in this case. So if I'm going to be considering the hybridization of this system, hybridization is going to be nothing but bond pairs plus lone pairs. Alright, so if I'm considering the hybridization, hybridization can be looked at as number of bond pairs plus number of lone pairs. So in this case here, it is going to be 2 plus 3, which means it is going to be 5, which means it is going to be sp3d hybridized. In this case, it is sp3d hybridized. It is going to be having 3 lone pairs. So the structure for I3 minus 1 will look like this. Iodine, iodine, iodine. I will be having 3 lone pairs on the central iodine in this case. So let me put the 3 lone pairs, 1 lone pair here, 1 lone pair here, 1 more lone pair here. This is going to be something which is going to be having this as your equatorial plane over here. and these two iodines are going to be on the axial. Obviously, repulsions have to be perfectly balanced over here. If the repulsions are not going to be balanced, there's going to be some residual force, which means the structure is not going to be stable. If it has to be stable, all electrostatic forces should be balanced, which means in this case, the iodine atoms should have perfect 90-degree angle with the equatorial plane, which means this bond angle is of course going to be 180 degrees in this case. So it is going to be a linear structure which is going to be having a bond angle of 180 degrees in this particular case. So linear and 180 is your answer for this particular case here. Now other structures which are going to be having similar scenario is going to be Br3 minus 1, ICl2 minus 1, similar structures like this. Another one is going to be XCF2. So effectively anything which is going to be having central atom having 8 valence electrons, and you're going to be having 3 lone pairs and 2 bond pairs. Let's get to the next one. Okay, correct statements. This is of course a good question, and it is going to be from atomic structure in this case here, and of course you can also think of it as modern physics from physics as well. Chemistry wise it's going to be from atomic structure chapter, class 11 NCERT. Let's have a look now. So kinetic energy. Now when you want to solve these kind of questions, the first thing you need to pay attention to here is you need to remember some proportionalities to make your job easier. What proportionalities I generally prefer remembering are the following two. I prefer remembering radius being proportional to n squared by z, and velocity in the nth shell is going to be proportional to z by n. Why do I prefer remembering these two? Mainly because by remembering these two, I can extrapolate and get every other relationship. I'll obviously be showing you how to get this done now. Let's start off. Kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is going to be what? Half into mv squared. That means if it is going to be kinetic energy here, let me explain on this side here. So if I'm looking for kinetic energy, it is going to be proportional to v squared. If it is proportional to v squared, velocity is proportional to z by n, which means my kinetic energy here should be proportional to z squared by n squared, which means first statement is correct. Next, n into v. Velocity is proportional to z by n. N into v now, what should that be proportional to in this case? N into v. Velocity is z by n. That means n into, I'm going to be having multiplied by z by n. N and n will cancel. That means this is proportional to z power 1. They have given it as z squared. That means this is wrong. Frequency is going to be proportional to something. Now let's talk about what is frequency first. See, if you're thinking about frequency, the simple idea is how many times something revolves around the nucleus in this case here. So this is going to be frequency of electron in a particular orbit over here, or in a particular shell. So it is going to be the number of times the electron revolves around the nucleus in 1 unit time interval. So obviously the time interval which you're going to be taking is 1 second. So if I'm going to be considering it as 1 second over here, in 1 second, how much distance will the electron cover? That is what is going to be velocity. Velocity is defined as the distance traveled in 1 second over here. So when you're talking about frequency, it is going to be distance in 1 second divided by distance for 1 revolution around nucleus. That is basically the idea here. So distance traveled in 1 second now, that is going to be velocity. Distance for 1 revolution around the nucleus, that is going to be your circumference of the orbit. If it is the circumference of the orbit, obviously it's going to be 2 pi r. So if it's going to be 2 pi r, it's velocity divided by 2 pi r. So if I'm going to be considering velocity by 2 pi r, 2 pi is a constant. I just need to find proportionality then. Velocity, it is proportional to z by n. So z by n, and r is proportional to n squared by z. So divided by n squared by z. That means this overall proportionality works out as z squared by n cubed. So my frequency in this particular case is going to be proportional to z squared divided by n cubed in this scenario here, which of course is not what is given. So this is wrong. Electrostatic force. Let's talk about electrostatic force. What is electrostatic force? You're already familiar with it from electrostatics in physics. Same formula, kq1 q2 by r squared. Let's talk that. So if I'm going to be considering kq1 q2 by r squared, what is k? Constant. I don't care about that. So let us just directly go to the proportionality. Q1 is going to be charge of an electron. Q2 is charge of nucleus. So in this case here, I will effectively have this as some constant k. Let me neglect the constant. Into charge of electron into charge of nucleus. Nucleus is going to be z times charge of electron. So in this case, E and D are of course going to be constants. We can neglect them eventually. Radius on the other hand is going to be something which we have just discussed is proportional to n squared divided by z. So if it's proportional to n squared divided by z, R squared is given over here, correct? So I need to square this guy here. So it will be n power 4 divided by z squared. Now, if I'm going to be bringing the proportionality more meaningfully over here, electron is going to be having electrostatic charge, which is the E, which is a constant, which I can include into the proportionality. So this works out as z cube by n power 4, which is perfectly what they have given over here. Delhi option is correct in this case. So among the 4 options here, A and D are correct. Answer is going to be option number 1. I hope this question is clear. This is a good challenging question where you need to actually remember one data and you need to understand how to manipulate this to get to your answer efficiently. This is a very good question, one of the tougher questions in this paper. If though you are comfortable and you understand how to proceed here and you understand Bohr's model thoroughly well enough, this is actually an easy question where you can get sure short marks. Let's get to the next one. This, by the way, is going to be one of the differentiating questions which will probably end up deciding a top ranker and a very good rank. Let's get to the next one. Which of the following is incorrect? Cr2O3 is amphoteric. Correct. Alright, they are asking incorrect though, but this statement is correct. When you're going to be having amphoteric systems, the general rule of the thumb is this: most metal ions which are going to be present in +3 or +4 oxidation states will almost always be amphoteric. There is only very few exceptions here. For instance, iron +3 is going to be basic, but more or less all the other +3 and +4 will be amphoteric. In terms of +5, vanadium pentoxide is going to be amphoteric, and in terms of +2, we'll end up having beryllium +2, we'll have lead +2, tin +2. These guys are also going to be amphoteric along with zinc +2 as well. But in +3, only exception which is going to be basic in nature is iron +3. Remaining are all going to be amphoteric. So this statement is correct. Ruthenium tetroxide will have ruthenium in +8 oxidation state. Obviously, +8 oxidation state is the highest possible. If it is in the highest possible oxidation state, then it will only undergo reduction. If it's only undergoing reduction, it is definitely an oxidizing agent. Oxidizing agent will undergo reduction. So if this guy is going to be only undergoing reduction, this is certainly an oxidizing agent. In fact, it will probably be a very powerful oxidizing agent. So yes, this statement is also correct. That means this is also wrong. VOSO4 is a reducing agent. Let's first look at vanadium. Vanadium is going to be the D3 configuration. So it's going to be something like 4s2 3d3. So there are 5 valence electrons here. So vanadium will have oxidation states from 0 up to +5. +5 is going to be your maximum oxidation state possible for vanadium here. Let's now look at this VOSO4. VOSO4 now, whenever you see this kind of weird compound, your job is not to panic over that. Your job is to look at it and try to break it down into meaningful pieces which you can understand directly. Let's talk about how to break it down. So SO4, you obviously know is going to be sulfate. So VO here, we can take it as VO +2 and an SO4 -2. So in this case, it is a VO +2. Oxygen obviously is way more electronegative than a metal like vanadium. So oxygen has to be in -2 oxidation state. But this entire thing is in +2. That means the vanadium has to be in +4 oxidation state. So the oxidation number for vanadium in this case is +4. If it is in +4, can it go to a higher oxidation state? Reducing agent now, it needs to undergo oxidation. So does it get oxidized? Oxidation is going to mean losing electrons generally. So when I'm going to be considering oxidation here, oxidation is effectively going to be nothing but losing electrons. You can remember this as oil in this particular case. Of course, reduction is gaining electrons. You can think of it as a rig in that case. Oil rig basically tells you whether it's going to be losing or gaining or what it is. Let's come back to this here. So in this case, +4 is a current oxidation state. It can still lose an electron and then go to +5. That means in this particular case, VOSO4 as a reducing agent is also a correct statement. Alright, this is also going to be a correct statement. Of course, this is going to be having a tiny bit of ambiguity because the VOSO4 will also undergo reduction, meaning it can also behave as an oxidizing agent in some cases. But of course, reducing agent is also correct in this case. So this statement is also correct. This is also wrong. Ruby appears. Okay, obviously there's a small gap in this particular case here. Let me fill it. Ruby appears red due to the presence of cobalt 3+. Ruby is obviously going to be a red colored gemstone. Ruby appears red due to the presence of cobalt 3+. This information is available in coordination compounds in 12th standard NCERT, where they have talked about how corundum is going to be the main base. Aluminium oxide, by the way, is corundum. Al2O3 is going to be the main composition of most of your gemstones. And these gemstones will generally end up having some metal ion, some D transition series metal ion available there, which will be giving it its characteristic color. In this case, the ruby is going to be appearing red, not because of cobalt plus 3, but because of chromium plus 3, not cobalt plus 3. So this is wrong. So this is your correct answer here, which is incorrect here. Answer is definitely going to be fourth option. The chromium plus 3 is what is going to be responsible for the red color in ruby over there. The greater the amount of chromium plus 3, the more reddish the ruby is going to be, the more brighter the red color is going to be. So in this particular case here, this is going to be your answer for the fourth option here. It is not cobalt plus 3, it is chromium plus 3. Let's get to the next one. Which of the following is the order of, which of the following order of melting point is correct? Now, melting point mainly depends on strength of ionic bond. Which of course is going to be dependent on lattice energy. So when you're going to be considering it as being dependent on lattice energy here, what is the basic principle there? Lattice energy is going to be dependent on electrostatic force of attraction. What do I mean by electrostatic force of attraction? I mean the same formula we talked about earlier. Regular physics electrostatic force of attraction, kq1 q2 by r squared. So when you're going to be considering kq1 q2 by r squared in this particular case here, how to approach based on this? In this case here, it is directly proportional to q1 into q2. So if my cation and anion are having higher charge, I will have greater lattice energy, I will have higher melting point. Similarly, if the R value is lesser, I will have greater lattice energy, I will have greater melting point certainly. So melting point here, if I want to categorize, it is proportional to charge of cation and anion directly. And melting point is also going to be inversely proportional to size of cation and anion. Larger the size of the cation and anion, lower the melting point. Smaller the size of the cation and anion, larger the melting point. That is basically the idea here. So smaller size means larger melting point, higher charge means larger melting point. Let's get to the case over here. They are comparing LiF and LiCl. LiF and LiCl, what is common there? Li plus is common. F minus and Cl minus is my comparison here. F minus is of course going to be something which is going to be having a smaller size compared to Cl minus. So both of them have same charge. So charge wise, both are same. No changes there. That means only thing which matters now is the size over here. So if I'm comparing based on size in this case, the answer is going to be quite obvious. This statement is correct. LiF is greater than LiCl is correct. Next, NaCl MgO. Let's have a look at NaCl and MgO here. NaCl MgO, we have a change in the charge itself. MgO is going to be having magnesium plus 2 and oxide O minus 2. NaCl is going to be having Na plus and a Cl minus. Obviously, charge wise, this is going to be greater. Q1 slash Q2 over here are greater compared to Q1 slash Q2 over here. So the basic idea here is Q1 slash Q2 for MgO are going to be greater than Q1 comma Q2 for NaCl. At the same time, size, if I'm going to be considering, oxide ion is going to be smaller than chloride, magnesium plus 2 is smaller than Na plus. So we are going to be having size wise also MgO wins, charge wise also MgO wins. That means this is wrong. Alright. So in this particular case here, let's have a look at the second option. This statement is wrong. This statement is wrong. This statement is wrong. This statement is wrong. Okay. So we're going to be having in this case here, it looks like both second and fourth option have been copied as the same thing. It doesn't make much of a difference. Let's look at option 3 here. This is correct. This is correct. So answer in this case is option 3 here. So effectively speaking, LiF is going to be greater than LiCl. Why? Because fluoride is smaller than chloride. And MgO is greater than NaCl. Why? Because charge wise also MgO wins. Size wise also MgO is smaller and hence it wins in terms of melting point. This is question number 13. Obviously, this is going to be something which is mainly from periodic properties chapter and chemical bonding chapter relating to ionic bonding. Let's get to the next one. Spin only magnetic moment of the following complexes. So here iron is in FeCl 4 times 2 minus, meaning it is going to be iron plus 2 here. Cobalt, this is not carbon monoxide guys, this is going to be cobalt, a small printing error. Let's accept it and move on. Cobalt over here is going to be with oxalate in this case. Oxalate is going to be C2O4 minus 2. So if I'm considering the OX, OX is actually going to be C2O4 minus 2 anion in this case. So the C2O4 minus 2, there are 3 times over there, so it's going to be a total of minus 6. So when I'm taking cobalt here, obviously it has to be plus 3. So cobalt plus 3, oxalate thrice, net is going to be a minus 3. So here cobalt is in plus 3, iron is in plus 2, manganese here is of course going to be in plus 6. Let us have a look at each of these cases here. Cobalt plus 3 is going to be D6 configuration. Alright, it is going to be having D6 configuration in this particular case here. How do I know that? Iron, cobalt and then nickel. So cobalt is going to be 4s2 3d7. So if I am removing 3 electrons, it will become 4s0 3d6. So cobalt plus 3 is 4s0 3d6 in this particular case here. So if it's 4s0 3d6, it's a d6 configuration. Oxalate is going to be a strong ligand because it's going to be a chelating ligand. What does chelating ligand mean? It means that it is a bidentate ligand. It is going to be forming a ring with the central metal ion over here. So it's going to be forming a ring in this case, which makes it obviously slightly stronger than expected. So it is going to be doing pairing up over here. So the split in this case is going to look like this. It's an octahedral complex. So we'll have a T2G and EG split over here. We'll end up having first electron, second electron, third electron, fourth electron, fifth electron, sixth electron. This is my T2G level. EG is completely empty in this case. So we'll end up having no unpaired electrons present over here. The EG will take the electrons from the, ligand in this particular case. So this is my 3D. We'll have a 4s and we'll of course have a 4p. So the electronic configuration for the cobalt plus 3 is going to be T2G fully filled. The ligand in this case will effectively have a hybridization as D2sp3 hybrid. So in this case, there are 0 unpaired electrons for this guy. So 0 unpaired electrons. So if there are 0 unpaired electrons, that means magnetic moment is going to be generally measured in a unit called as Bohr magneton, and the value is going to be square root of n into n plus 2. So if it is square root of n into n plus 2, it works out as square root of 0 into 0 plus 2, which of course is going to be 0 Bohr magneton in this particular case. So you're going to be having this particular cobalt 3 plus is going to be 0. Luckily, that directly gives us the answer. We don't need to even solve for the remaining 2 cases, but let me show you how to go about it. Manganese is in plus 6, correct? Manganese plus 6 now. Manganese is going to be 4s2 3d5. So manganese plus 6 works out as 4s0 3d1. So there's going to be 1 unpaired electron in this particular case here. 1 unpaired electron effectively tells you that you're going to be having square root of 1 into 1 plus 2, which works out as square root of 3, which is of course going to be 1.73. It's supposed to have been more exactly 1.73, but it's close enough, no problems over here. So this is also correct over here. Next, let's go for the iron plus 2. Iron plus 2 case is going to be something where you're going to be having iron is going to be 4s2 3d6. So if I take iron plus 2, it is going to be 4s0 3d6. That means this guy is also d6, but the point is this is going to be a tetrahedral complex. Tetrahedral complex now, it will break up like this. And at the same time, chloride ion is going to be a very weak ligand. It is not going to be something which can force pairing up. The oxalate was a strong ligand, so it got paired up at the bottom level itself. Whereas the chloride is going to be a much weaker ligand, it doesn't do pairing up. So d6 now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and then 6. Number of unpaired electrons in this case, 4 unpaired electrons over here. So we have 4 unpaired electrons here. So if there are 4 unpaired electrons in this particular case here, straightforward we can apply the formula. It will be square root of 4 into 4 plus 2. So it works out as square root of 24, which is going to be just below 5. So 4.9 is perfectly fine. So answer for this question is option number 1. Let's get to the next one. Alpha sulfur, beta sulfur, S2. Find how many are paramagnetic. This is actually a very easy question. Alpha sulfur, beta sulfur and S2. Now this is again a numerical question which is very easy. If you are familiar with the inorganic properly, this is a fantastic question to get straight away easy marks on. Wherein you don't need to spend too much time. Tuck, 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 you can get your answer here. Let's talk. So in this particular case here, alpha sulfur is going to be a rhombic sulfur. Beta sulfur is going to be monoclinic. And S2 is going to be similar to O2. Now when I'm considering O2 here, what is special about O2 here is this. When you are considering according to MOT over here, O2 will end up having electronic configuration as sigma 1s2. O2, by the way, how many electrons does it have total? 8 electrons per atom of oxygen, so there are 16 electrons total. Okay, so these 16 electrons total, now what is the configuration? Sigma 1s2, sigma star 1s2, sigma 2s2, sigma star 2s2. I am going to be considering in this particular case here the z-axis as my internuclear axis. Alright, I prefer using z-axis as internuclear. It does not matter which one you choose as internuclear. As long as you realize that along the internuclear axis you will have a sigma bond, on the other two axes you will be having a pi bond being formed. So in this particular case here I am choosing z-axis as internuclear. Now I will be having sigma 2pz2 pi 2px2 equal to pi 2py2. Now how many electrons are done? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 electrons, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 electrons are done. Now I need to basically put the last 2 electrons. The last 2 electrons will be going into pi star. But the point to pay attention to here is this. The pi star 2px and the pi star 2py are going to be having equal energy. When I am filling up equal energy orbitals, I need to follow Hund's rule in this case. So I need to fill them up singly first and then only pair them up. So originally when they are filled up singly, you can see there is going to be 1 unpaired electrons present. So there are 2 unpaired electrons present in O2 molecule. Okay, you're going to be having 2 unpaired electrons over here. So when you're going to be having 2 unpaired electrons in O2, O2 is going to be a paramagnetic system. In fact, to explain oxygen's paramagnetic character only, people started actually looking for a new theory which could explain it. That is why MOT was actually made in the first place. One of the first reasons, one of the first, effects which they wanted to explain was paramagnetic behavior of oxygen. VBT could not explain the paramagnetic characteristic of oxygen. Same thing applies to sulfur over here, excepting in sulfur, it will not be 2, it will be the third shell in every case here. So whatever we have written for sigma 1, sigma 2 here, just copy the same part, this part over here, for the sigma 3 and the pi 3 over there. So the third shell, sulfur will have the same kind of configuration, meaning sulfur will effectively become pi 3px1, pi star 3px1 equals pi star, by this pi star, sorry, this is pi only, my mistake over here. I put it correctly only, I just did not notice it. So I'm going to be having pi star 3px1 and pi star 3py1. This is going to be the case for sulfur, because of which it will be paramagnetic in this case. So in this particular scenario here, I am going to be having sulfur being paramagnetic. The rhombic sulfur and monoclinic sulfur are not paramagnetic. They are normal sulfur atoms where you're going to be having perfect bonding there. There are no unpaired electrons present. Rhombic and monoclinic are the standard allotropes of sulfur. So you're going to be having these two guys being normal systems which are going to be diamagnetic. S2 alone is going to be paramagnetic. This information about S2 is available in your NCERT textbook in group 16 in P block elements chapter, class 12 NCERT. So please make sure you're having a look at it in case you're not clear with this. The idea here is S2 is the only one which is going to be paramagnetic here. The other two, rhombic and monoclinic sulfurs, are going to be diamagnetic in this case. Let's get to the next one. Which of the following can be used for clotting blood efficiently? This is a nice question. This is one of the slightly more interesting questions in the paper here. In NCERT textbook, they have given about hemoglobin. The interesting point here is this: blood is going to be a negatively charged colloid. But the hemoglobin part of blood is actually going to be a positively charged colloid. So when you're going to be having blood taken into account, blood is negatively charged, whereas the hemoglobin is actually a positively charged. So they are clearly telling you clotting of blood efficiently. So I want to clot a negatively charged colloid efficiently. How do I clot a negatively charged colloid efficiently? The way is add positive charge. Coagulated by positive charge. Now, the coagulation is going to be depending on Hardy-Schulze rule. This is of course available in surface chemistry chapter under colloids over here. Okay, so this is going to be following Hardy-Schulze rule. So when you're considering the Hardy-Shoes rule in this particular case here, what is going to be happening is the greater the charge of the cation, you will end up having greater coagulating power. So the one which is going to be best at performing coagulation will effectively be having maximum charge. So the idea here is greater charge, let me put it this way, greater charge implies better coagulation. And if the charge is going to be same, smaller size implies better coagulation. So the coagulation over here, yeah, my handwriting is kind of beautifully bad, let me put it that way. So yeah, coagulation is what I am putting over here. So greater charge means better coagulation, smaller size means better coagulation. Let's get to the point as the next thing here. So in this particular case, we need to figure out which one's got the highest positive charge. Na plus 1, ion plus 3. So ion plus 3 is directly greater than Na plus 1. Na plus 1 is wrong. Ion plus 2. Plus 2 is lesser than plus 3, wrong. Magnesium plus 2, plus 2 is lesser than plus 3, wrong. Answer here has to be iron plus 3 in this case. So this is going to be your answer in this case. So when you want to coagulate blood, blood is a negatively charged colloid. This is not given in NCERT. This is given in NCERT. So this is from NCERT. But NCERT does not give you information about blood over here. So definitely this is one of the differentiating questions in this paper over here, mainly because it is slightly outside of NCERT. Alright, it is definitely going to be something which will definitely be available in the Narayana package. In case you are not familiar with it, please check it out. Let's get to the next question. Okay, alright. So as I was saying at the beginning of the paper, this particular question paper has got quite a few, calculation intensive questions certainly. Now, students who wrote the exam may have been given an option where they would have probably been informed that, please answer questions according to integer answer or up to 2 decimal places. In terms of instructions, what I would recommend is this: please follow instructions given at the heading first. Let us say at the beginning of the numerical, they are telling you answer according to integer. Alright, give an integer answer. Then go for integer. But in the subsequent question over there, if they are asking for answer up to 2 decimal places, you have to override the instruction above and then answer according to 2 decimal places. If they are giving the same instruction, no problem. But if they are giving you a different instruction in the question, please follow the instruction given in that question. Otherwise, follow the instruction which has been given at the heading for all the numericals. So let's go with this over here. In this case here, there is obviously going to be a small issue here. This is not really G naught M over here. It is actually going to be delta G naught formation. Okay. It is actually delta G naught formation for both of these two guys over here. Let's talk about what's happening. So in this case, we need to find the equilibrium constant log K to the base 10 in this particular case over here. So how to proceed here? I need to find out delta G naught of the reaction. So let's take this reaction. I'm going to call it as reaction number 1. So delta G naught of 1, let's call this as delta G naught data 2, delta G naught data 3. So delta G naught of the reaction number 1 can be written as, see, in this case, we've got delta G naught formation of the 2 substances here. Now, if I'm given formation here, the idea goes like this. Delta G naught of a particular reaction can be written as sigma of delta G naught formation of products minus reactants. This is the general notation which we are going to be using. If they are giving you Gibbs free energy formation for all of the individual systems, this is basically how you proceed. You'll be doing products minus reactants in this case. Okay. So let's get to this one here. So it's delta G naught formation of products minus reactants. What are the products here? Products are C6H6. So this is going to be 1 into C6H6K. It's going to be minus 1.4 into 10 power 5. Next. C2H2 is going to be plus 2.4 into 10 power 5 here, but there are 3 moles given over here. So we need to effectively take it as minus 3 into 2.4 into 10 power 5. Obviously, everything is in joules in this particular case here. We need to stick with joules over here. So we'll end up having, in this particular case here, the product will, the summation will work out as minus 1.4, 3 into 2.4. 3 into 2.4 now, it's going to be 2, 6, 6 plus 1.2, 7.2. So 7.2 there and a 1.4 here. 7.2 plus a 1.4 works out as 8.6. So it works out as minus 8.6 into 10 to the power of 5. So minus 8.6 into 10 to the power of 5 is the case over here now. So minus 8.6 into 10 to the power of 5 is my data value over here, joules in this particular case for that particular reaction. They want us to calculate log 10 to the, log k to the base 10. So how to proceed here? Delta G naught of reaction is going to be equal to minus RT log of K equilibrium to the base E. If I want to convert it to the base 10, I need to basically convert the log base E to the log base 10, which makes it as minus 2.303 into R into T into log to the base 10 of K. So I need to bring everything to this side. So delta G naught value, we've got it as minus 8.6 into 10 power 5. So bring everything to this side, minus and minus cancel, meaning we'll be having log 10 or the log k to the base 10 works out as, in this case, 8.6 into 10 to the power of 5 divided by 2.303 into R value. I'm taking everything in terms of joules over here, correct? So when I'm taking everything in joules, R value has to be taken as 8.314 multiplied by temperature. It is all under standard conditions. Temperature is going to be 298 Kelvin in this particular case. Solving will give us answer as this one. Okay, I had actually solved it and then I checked the answer. This is basically the answer which we are going to be getting over here. So the answer for this works out as 150.72. This is going to be the answer for this question number 17. Let's get to the next one. Okay, 1.86 grams of aniline is converted into acetanilide with 90% efficiency. Mass of acetanilide formed is going to be x into 10 power minus 2 grams. Okay, let's talk about this one here. Aniline is going to be converted to acetanilide. Let's talk about the reaction now quickly. The reaction is fairly easy. This is basically protection of amine. So I'm having aniline over here. I'm going to be reacting it with CH3 C double bond OCl. Or I can also react it with acetic anhydride in the presence of pyridine. Okay, so what is going to be happening in this particular case here? We will end up having the reaction giving product as NHCH3. Sorry, let me just rub it off. So it's going to be giving product as NHC double bond CH3. Okay, so this compound is going to be your acetanilide. This is your aniline. Now, first things first, let's talk about what you need to do in this particular question here. You need to first find out molecular mass of aniline. So I'm going to take M1 is going to be molecular mass of aniline. And I'm going to take this acetanilide as molecular mass of acetanilide. Let's take it as M2. Okay, so what do we need to do in this particular case here? So first of all, 1.86 grams of aniline. 1 mole is supposed to give 1 mole. That is the standard reaction over here according to stoichiometry. But it is being done at 90% efficiency. That means we can effectively go about it as 1.86 divided by molecular mass of aniline. Molecular mass of aniline, now how much is that going to be? That is going to be C6H5NH2. So C6H5NH2, now C6 is going to work out as 72. 72 plus H5 is going to be 5. NH2 is going to be 16 in this case. So 72 plus 16 works out as 88. 88 plus 5 works out as 93. So nice enough. So 1.86 divided by 93. Now, so this is going to be a molecular mass of aniline over here. This works out as 93 in this case. Cool. So 1.86 by 93 gives me number of moles of aniline. That is converted to 90% efficiency. The efficiency is with respect to number of moles, not with respect to number of grams. So 96 is going, 1.86 by 93 is my number of moles of aniline. This is supposed to be 1:1, but with 90% efficiency. 90% efficiency now multiplied by 0.9. This is my number of moles of acetanilide obtained. Which basically tells me that once I got the number of moles, they want to calculate the mass multiplied by mass of this acetanilide. Acetanilide, what are we going to be doing over here? We are going to replace a hydrogen in aniline with a CH3CO group over here. CH3CO, now what is the mass of this over here? It is going to be 2 carbons, so it's going to be 12 into 2, so it works out as 24. 24 plus an oxygen is going to be 16 plus 3 hydrogens over here. So you're going to be having 24 plus 16, now it works out as 40. 40 plus 3 works out as 43. So we are adding 43, but we are subtracting 1 hydrogen. So effectively addition of 42. So we're going to be having 93 plus 42. Now it works out as 193, 103, 113, 123, 133. So 133 plus another 2 over here. So we're going to be having 135. So we're going to be having it as 135 in this case here. So this value works out as 135. Either way, it doesn't make much of a difference. So you just have to multiply it by molecular mass of acetanilide. This value works out as 2.43 in this case. Okay, the number of grams works out as 2.43 over here. I had calculated it a while back before the paper started, before I started the discussion. So it works out as 2.43 grams. They are asking you to give it as x into 10 power minus 2. So this 2.43 grams can be written as 243 into 10 power minus 2 grams. So the answer here is actually 243. So you need to give the answer here as 243 in this particular case here, which is what I have scribbled over here. So you're going to be having question number 18 here, having answer as 243. Let's get to the next one. As I had mentioned earlier, the questions in physical chemistry are definitely calculation intensive. This question is actually one of the easier questions where you're going to be having very little calculation to be done. It can quite easily be solved off. Let's get to the next one. This is a painful calculation based question, no escape. Freezing point of benzene liquid is going to be 5.5 degrees Celsius. If 10 grams of C4H10, C4H10 now my molecular mass for this guy works out as C4 now 48 plus 10 works out as 58. So molecular mass is 58, is mixed with 200 grams of benzene. I'm going to consider this guy as my solvent. And this bugger, I'm going to take it as solute. Obviously, there is a problem here. What is the problem in the question? Normally, when we are talking about freezing point depression or boiling point elevation, the problem there is this. You need to have a non-volatile solute in a volatile solvent. The solvent here is volatile, but this C4H10 is butane. Butane is a gas, normal condition. So what we need to do over here is, we need to put away our unnecessary thoughts here. Yes, the question is not perfectly correct. Yes, they have given a gas in a liquid over here, but unfortunately, the only way we can proceed to solve this question is if we close our brain and don't ask unnecessary questions. See, our job is not to question the question. Our job is to answer the question according to what has been given. If there are mistakes, we will have to answer to the best extent possible where you can score marks efficiently. You are going to be having small errors like this in your JEE mains paper, definitely. The job over here is not to stupidly ask questions as to why this is going to be there. We are not going to be in control of what is the key. The NTA is going to be in control of the key. So you have to answer to the best extent possible. If you see mistakes, don't worry about it. Read the question again, see if you can answer the question in a meaningful manner, and try to get the question done according to what has been given. If there is a mistake, there is no problem. NTA will take care of it. It is not something which you have to be worried about. Let's get to the next thing. So in this particular case here, we are given 10 grams of this fellow here. I'm going to assume the C4H10 is going to be a non-volatile solute. I'm going to assume standard scenarios where I'm going to be taking delta TF formula. So what is the formula I'm going to be applying here? Delta TF is equal to Kf into molality. What is meant by molality? Molality is the number of moles of solute in 1000 grams of solvent. So 200 grams of solvent, we are going to be having 10 grams of solute. So in 1000 grams of benzene, this will basically be containing 5 times this. Now this will also be 5 times, meaning I'll be having 50 grams of C4H10. So I'll be having 50 grams of C4H10 in this particular case here, which is going to be present in this particular 1000 grams of benzene over here. So I'm going to be considering 50 grams of C4H10 here. What is going to be my number of moles of C4H10? We can calculate that. What is the number of moles of the C4H10? It works out as 50 divided by the molecular mass of C4H10, which is going to be 58. So 50 by 58 moles of C4H10 is going to be present in this particular case here. Supposed to be 10. So yeah, so 50 by 58 moles of C4H10 is present. This is my molality. So we can directly calculate delta TF. The delta TF here works out as Kf has been given as 5.12. So 5.12 into 50 by 58. So 5.12 into 50 by 58 is my delta TF in this particular case here. This delta TF is nothing but depression of freezing point, meaning the normal freezing point has decreased by this much amount. That means my new freezing point of solution is going to be freezing point of pure solvent minus delta TF, meaning it works out as pure solvent ke liye they are given you as 5.5 degrees Celsius. So it works out as 5.5 minus 5.12 into 50 by 58. This value I had solved earlier and the answer works out as 1.09 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the answer in this case works out as 1.09 degrees Celsius. That is the answer for this question. Definitely this is not going to be a tough question, but it definitely involves a little bit of calculation and you need to be careful when you're doing these calculations. Let's get to the next one. Okay, de Broglie's wavelength of a proton and alpha particle is the same. Calculate the ratio of their velocities. Basically, they are giving you that the de Broglie wavelengths are the same. Another question from atomic structure. In fact, in this paper here, you are having 2 questions from atomic structure and there are, I think, 2 questions from electrochemistry as well. The morning session on 24th February did not have any question from electrochemistry at all. There was one question which involved electrode potentials and D block over there. So effectively what I see as a pattern over here is they are trying to cover all chapters equally in all papers totally put together. It may not be perfectly even in every paper, but they are definitely trying to make it evened out in multiple papers put together. Let's get to this here. So de Broglie's wavelength, by the way, the morning session did not have too many questions on atomic structure. So there was only 1 question on atomic structure. This paper already has had 2 questions on atomic structure. Let's get to it. So de Broglie's wavelength of a proton and alpha particle. De Broglie's wavelength, the formula is lambda is equal to h by mv. Okay, so when you're going to be considering lambda equal to h by mv, lambda of the proton is going to be h by mass of proton into velocity of proton, which is in turn going to be lambda of the alpha particle, which is going to be h by mass of alpha particle into velocity of the alpha particle. Now, what is an alpha particle? That is the simple thing which you have to look at over here. Alpha particle is going to be helium nuclei, which basically means it is going to be helium 2,4, entire thing 2 plus. So helium nuclei mass number is going to be 4 in this particular case. So if the mass number is going to be 4 over here, what does that tell us? That tells us that the helium mass or the alpha particle's mass is going to be 4 times the mass of a proton in this particular case. So if it is 4 times the mass of a proton, we can directly substitute here. So h by mass of proton into velocity of proton is going to be equal to h by 4 times mass of proton into velocity of alpha. Mass of proton cancel, h and h get cancelled. We need to find the ratio of velocity of proton to alpha. So velocity of proton to alpha, we need Vp by V alpha, which of course works out as bring the 4 to this side, bring the velocity to this side, you'll end up getting it as 4 by 1. So you're going to be having velocity of proton by velocity of the alpha particle being 4:1 in this particular case here. So answer for this question works out as 4. Let's get to the next one. This, by the way, is one of the easier, simple to solve questions from the numericals from physical chemistry. So this is definitely a must solve for question for students who want to save up on time. Let's get to the next one. Okay, if H plus is changed from 1 molar concentration to 10 power minus 4 molar concentration, find the change in electrode potential for this guy. Okay, all right. So they are giving us that in this particular case, we are supposed to take RT by Fs 0.059 in this particular case. Assume that we are going to be having any other ion present under standard condition. Standard condition now 1 molar condition. Let's proceed. So in this particular case here, we are going to be having reaction first needed over here. This is going to be the electrode potential which is given, which we need to check out for. First, we need to understand what is the reaction which happens over here. Let's proceed here. So MnO4 minus is going to give me Mn plus 2. This is definitely one of the more challenging questions in this particular paper over here, where you need to understand electrochemistry thoroughly and at the same time it involves solving. Let's get to the same thing here. Let's go on. So manganese plus 2 is going to be formed here. So manganese plus 7 is going to go for manganese plus 2. So plus 7 to plus 2 now the change is going to be 5. So this guy has to gain 5 electrons in this particular case over here. Okay, so it's got and gained 5 electrons. Cool. So the MnO4 minus has gained 5 electrons. In this, obviously, it's going to be a reduction reaction. There are 4 oxygens though here. Let's balance it out. When you want to balance oxygens in acidic medium, you need to add water to the other side. So there is 4 H2O added. Excellent. Oxygen is balanced. Now the hydrogens are imbalanced. There is going to be 8 hydrogens on the right hand side, no hydrogens on the left hand side. Add H plus to balance hydrogens in acidic medium. Now there is one way where you can check if this balancing is being done correctly or not. How to check over here? You can check the number of atoms like normal balancing. Cool, that's perfectly fine, it will work out. But that's not enough. If it is to be redox balance, the other check which you have to perform is the total charge on the left hand side should be equal to the total charge on the right hand side over here. So let's have a look at the charge here. It's 8 plus minus 1 minus 5. So 8 plus minus 1 minus 5. Now net charge is going to be plus 2. On the right hand side, net charge is going to be only manganese is plus 2 over here. So as you can see, the charges are also perfectly balanced. So this is a perfectly redox balanced equation. Now they are talking about the E naught for this reaction. Let's talk about the Q for this now. Right now we are changing it from 1 molar to 10 power minus 4, correct? That means I am changing from the E naught condition to E cell condition. Naught condition means everything is under standard condition. Standard condition na any ion present. This is an ion, aqueous. Ion, aqueous. Ion, aqueous. Any ion which is going to be present should be present at 1 molar concentration. That is the basis for anything to be something which is going to be under standard condition. So standard condition in electrochemistry requires a certain set of conditions there. Temperature should be 298 Kelvin. Any gases present should be having 1 atmosphere partial pressure. Any ions present should be having 1 molar concentration. This is the definition of standard condition with respect to electrochemistry. Let's get to things here. So what is my Q here? Q is going to be nothing but reaction quotient for this over here. So it's effectively going to be products by reactants. What are the products by reactants? Manganese plus 2. Concentration, of course, divided by MnO4 minus concentration into H plus concentration whole to the power of 8. Why power 8? Because there is 8 H plus here. So this is my Q here. Let's write down now. So in this case, E cell can be written as E naught. See, look at the case over here. The original condition is 1, 1 and 1. Meaning everything is under 1 molar concentration. That means it's under standard conditions. So E cell is going to be E naught minus they are asking us to take it as 0.059 divided by N. What is N? N is the number of moles of electrons transferred, which is 5 moles of electrons transferred for this equation. So the idea here is you need to write the equation first, balance it properly, calculate the N and then get the Q out. So the N value is 5 in this case divided by 5 log of Q. Okay, so if it's going to be log Q in this particular case here, we can directly proceed and go about it over here. So E cell works out as E naught minus 0.059 divided by 5 into, I am going to be having the Q value here, manganese plus 2, they are telling us to take it as 1. This is given as 1. This MnO4 minus is also given as 1. What is changing? H plus is changing to become 10 power minus 4 in this case. So if it works out as 10 power minus 4, this guy is 10 power minus 4. Meaning my Q here simply works out as 1 divided by 10 power minus 4 whole to the power of 8. So it works out as 1 divided by 10 power minus 32. So bring it up, it works out as 10 to the power of 32. So my Q is 10 power 32 now. It works out as log of 10 to the power of 32. Which of course is going to be 32. Meaning we are going to be having it as E naught minus 0.059 by 5 into 32. Now, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Now, I have noticed that some, online publishers of the key over here have given the answer as plus 0.3776. It depends on the question here. If they have asked you find the change, if they have mentioned change, you need to understand that the electrode potential here is going to be decreasing in this particular case. If it is decreasing, the change has to be given with a negative sign in this particular scenario over here. But if they have given find the reduction in electrode potential, depending on the wording in the question paper, the answer will either have a plus sign or a minus sign. So This definitely is going to be something which depends on what has been given in the question actually. So what I'm trying to say here is it might be a plus sign, it might be a minus sign over here also, but it mainly depends on the wording used in the question paper over there. If they are mentioned find change, if it is given as change, the answer has to be minus point, this value by the way, it works out as that 3776. So it works out as E naught minus 0.3776. So when you're going to be having, in this particular case, if they give it to you as change, the answer is minus 0.3776. If they are giving it to you as reduction in electrode potential, in that case, the answer has to be given as plus 0.3776. Of course, it also depends on whether you can actually input a negative value in the exam or not. So most probably it is going to be something where the negative value can certainly be inputted. So depending on the question, you need to decide how to answer. If the question was given as change, answer would be minus. If the question is giving us reduction in the electrode potential, then when they are already telling you decrease or reduction, you can directly give it as a plus. So this is basically question number 21. Again, this is definitely one of the more challenging questions in the paper. It involves calculation, not too much of a calculation certainly, but definitely some calculation, and more importantly, understanding. You need to understand the concept behind what electrode potential means perfectly. Only then you can attempt this question confidently. Let's get to the next one. VML of a hydrocarbon CXHY requires 6 VML of oxygen for complete combustion and forms 4 VML of carbon dioxide. This is going to be a question on eudiometry, which is going to be involving both stoichiometry and states of matter chapter. Now, let me quickly describe the principle used in eudiometry over here. The principle used over here is this. Whenever we are going to be doing the reaction, we'll be doing it under constant temperature and pressure condition. I don't care what is going to be the temperature and pressure as long as it is maintained constant. It can be standard, it may not be standard. As long as temperature is constant and pressure is maintained a constant, we will have volume being equal to nRT by P. Assuming they are all ideal gases, of course. All right, I'm going to assume all of them are ideal gases. So in that particular case, the RT by P becomes a constant, which means my volume here is actually directly proportional to number of moles. So whatever we write as number of moles, we can write it in terms of volume also now. So the idea behind eudiometry is under constant pressure and temperature conditions, the volume of a gas is directly proportional to the number of moles of a gas. So instead of looking at it as number of moles, we can treat it like volume as well. That is the basic idea here. Let's look at it. So CXHY is going to be reacting with O2. It is going to be giving me X moles of carbon dioxide gas, plus of course we'll be getting Y by 2 of H2. In this particular case here, I'm going to be taking into assumption that I'm going to be having the gas over here is carbon dioxide, oxygen is a gas. I'm also going to be considering that my hydrocarbon is also going to be a gas in this case. So they're telling that VML is going to be requiring 6V and it is going to be producing 4V of this. So if it's going to be requiring 6V and producing 4V, I just told you, balancing is going to be based on number of moles. The same thing applies in terms of number of volumes over here as well. That means I can effectively say the balancing is going to be 1 mole, requires 6 moles and produces 4 moles. So straight away we get the value of X. X is going to be 4. So my current balanced equation looks like this. 1 mole of CXHY plus, in this case instead of X I can directly substitute it as 4. Makes our job easier. Let me take that straight away. So 1 mole of C4Hy is going to be requiring 6 moles of oxygen to give me 4 moles of carbon dioxide gas plus Y by 2 moles of H2. Now, how is it to solve for Y? Very straightforward. Just check the balancing and you're done. For instance, in this case, there's 6 moles of oxygen over here. So 6 moles of oxygen are 12 oxygen atoms on this side. So 12O on this side, this guy is going to be having 8 oxygens. So there's going to be 8 oxygens here. So left over, this fellow should obviously be having 4 oxygen atoms. So if this guy has to have 4 oxygen atoms, what should be Y by 2 there? Y by 2 has to be 4 in this case. So Y by 2 is 4 now. Y works out as 8. This is a very easy question. Again, one of the easier to solve questions. Of course, when they are giving you something easier to solve, they are making it more conceptual, where only if you understand eugeometry, you will find this question easy. So it's a good question certainly, but it is going to be something which has very simple calculation associated with it. Let's get to the next one. Okay, question number 23. Sucrose is going to be having a first order reaction here, where it's going to become glucose and fructose. The half-life time is going to be given as 3.33 hours. 3.33 now we can take it as 10 by 3. So we're going to be having half-life time is given as 10 by 3. Fraction remaining of sucrose at 9 hours is going to be F. Okay, they are asking us to find out the value of 100 times log of 1 by F. Okay, this is a nice question. Again, this is going to be from an easy chapter, but it is a fantastic conceptual question. They have also given you log 10 to the base, log 2 to the base 10 is going to be 0.3 in this case. Let's have a look here. So in this particular case here, T half has been given. So rate constant of first order can be written as ln of 2 by T half. Ln 2 can be written as 2.303 times log to the base 10 of 2 divided by T half. The T half here is 10 by 3, so it works out as 2.303 log 2 divided by 10 by 3. So divided by 10 by 3 now into 3 divided by 10. This is my rate constant of this equation. Excellent. Now, let's try to understand how much is left over at 9 hours over here. How much is left over at 9 hours now? It's first order decomp. So first order decomposition now, I can use first order equation. What is first order equation? First order equation is very straightforward. Ln of A0 by AT is equal to KT. This is my first order equation. So in this case here, ln, I need to convert it to log. So let's bring it to log. So it works out as 2.303 into log of A0 by AT. A0 in this case, they are telling you F is the fraction remaining. Fraction remaining now, I can directly take my original amount as 1. If I take original amount as 1, out of 1, F is going to be the amount which is left over, which automatically becomes a fraction remaining, because fraction remaining now it is F by 1. So I will directly be having in this case the point that they have given F is fraction, means I can effectively take A0 as 1 and AT as F. This is basically the idea here. So if A0 is going to be 1, AT will be F over here. So I'll have it as 1 divided by F is equal to K into T. What is K? 2.303 log 2 into 3 divided by 10. Of course, into time. The time given here is 9 hours over here. So multiplied by 9 on the numerator. So what is going to be happening over here? The 2.303 will cancel. Bring the 10 to the side, it works out as 10 into log of 1 by F is going to be equal to 9 into 3 into log 2. I am interested in getting 100 times log of 1 by F. So 100 times log of 1 by F now, it is going to be 100 into log of 1 by F, which works out as extra 10 aayega, so multiplied by 10. 10 into 9 into 3 into log 2. Log 2 has been given as 0.3 in the question, so it works out as 3 into 9 into 3. Because log 2 into 10 works out as 3 here, so it works out as 9 squared, 81. So answer for this question is going to be 81 in this case. Again, this question also does not have too much of a solving pattern, but it definitely has a conceptual aspect associated with it to a good extent. This is a beautiful question where if you understand the concept cleanly, you can straight away solve it tuck, 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 without any problems. But if you do not understand the concept, it is going to be quite painful. Let's get to the next one. So I think this is the last question we have in this particular paper. We couldn't collect all the questions yet. This happened only yesterday in the evening. So today is 25th morning actually. So either way, so we'll be ending the discussion after this. Let me finish this question. So determine the volume occupied by 4.75 grams of acetylene gas at 740 millimeters of mercury pressure and 50 degrees Celsius temperature. R value is given. You are expected to get the value in liters. This is a straightforward formula application question from States of Matter chapter. Of course, it involves a painful calculation. Wherever they are giving you a beautifully conceptual related question, they are making the calculations easier. Wherever they are giving you a straightforward formula application based question, they are making the calculation painful. So it is a choice which you have to make. Whether you are going to be interested in spending more time and gaining marks in an easy conceptual question where there is not much of a concept, or you basically understand the concept and spend time understanding the question clearly and you can get the answer quickly because calculation is not there. So it definitely favors both types of students who have learned the concept thoroughly. It will favor them in terms of lesser amount of time spent. For those for whom the concept is not that strong, it is a direct formula based question where you can directly apply it in ideal gas equation, but at the same time calculation is going to take time. Let's get to it. So in this particular case here, volume occupied, I'm going to be taking it as ideal gas equation. So volume is going to be nRT by P. They want it in liters over here, so let's directly substitute. Number of moles 4.75 is the number of grams available. Molecular mass of acetylene, acetylene is C2H2, so the molecular mass is going to be 24 plus 2, 26. Okay, so it's going to be 12 into 2 plus 2, so it's going to be 12 into 2, 24, 24 plus 2, 26. So 4.75 by 26. So 4.75 by 26 over here. This is going to be my number of moles of acetylene. Next, R value they have clearly given you into 4 decimal places, 0.0826. Next, temperature, it is given as 50 degrees Celsius. You need to of course convert it to Kelvin scale. So 273 Kelvin is 273 Kelvin is going to be 0 degrees. So 50 degrees works out as 323 Kelvin. Divided by, I am going to be having pressure. Pressure has been given as 740 millimeters of mercury. Here though they are using atmospheres. How to convert this into atmospheres? 760 millimeters is going to be 1 atm. Meaning in this case 740 by 760 is going to be my X atmospheres. To get it into atmospheres, this is basically the idea here. So how to convert it into atmospheres here? 740 by 760. Solving is not easy. I had checked up the solving. It works out as approximately 5 liters. Alright, it works out as approximately 5 liters solving wise. So yes, it is not easy to solve, but it is definitely something which is worth solving if you are not confident about the remaining questions. If you are not confident for the remaining questions, this is definitely a question which is completely worth solving and investing some time into it. It will take barely 2 minutes to sit and solve, not more than that. So I think this was the last question. Let me just check if there's another question. Yeah, this is the last question which we have in our current discussion over here. I will probably see you guys in another discussion. Take care guys, good luck, and I hope this discussion benefited you. Thank you very much.